Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Windows 365, an insider's view. I'm very pleased to be hosting this session today from cubesys, and we've got guests from Microsoft, which is Ian Hurd, and Nerdio with Vadim, who will be doing a great demo for us later on, I'm sure. But first of all, let me just do a couple of quick introductions, and then we'll get our speakers online. Bring up my slides, sorry people. A couple of technical problems there. So the agenda today is cubesys will do some introductions, and then we'll have Microsoft talk about the product, give us an overview of the new product, Windows 365, a very exciting new addition to the Windows Virtual Desktop offerings. And Ian will also maybe give us some insights into the Asia Pacific market and what's happening around Windows 365. And then I will pass it over to Vadim. Vadim from Nerdio will do some demonstrations and give us some deep dive into the product at the back end and how we can leverage some of the investment you might have already made in Azure Virtual Desktop. And then we'll go to some QA and some discussions. So please do put some questions up for me and the panel, and we'll answer those at the end of the session. And I'm sure you're all interested to know where Windows 365 fits in and how it works alongside Azure Virtual Desktop, so we'll be sure to kick off with that question at the discussion section. Right. But first of all, let me introduce the team in more detail. So Vadim, who is the CEO of Nerdio, will be doing the presentation at the end, and Vadim has over 20 years in IT and a self-confessed IT nerd, so it'll be great to see how technical we get. Thanks very much for joining us, Vadim. And then we have Ian. Ian, over 5 years at Microsoft now, I believe, Ian, and current role is the sales lead for Asia Pac with Microsoft Managed Desktop and now Windows 365. So very exciting. I'm sure we have some insights into the marketplace. Thank you for joining us, Ian. Thanks, Paul. Yeah. I thought I might help the audience get to know you a little bit better by just having some quick fire fun questions to get us started before I'm going to hand over to you, Ian, to start the presentation. So our quick fire questions, let's see what type of people we've got joining us today in the presentation. So first question, are we tea or coffee people? And Vadim, do you want to go first?
Sure, definitely coffee.
You're a coffee man. What about yourself, Ian?
I like to play up to English stereotypes. I'm a tea man.
Good man, good man. Okay. Question two, summer or winter? Vadim again, would you like to go first, mate?
Oh, summer for sure.
Definitely. What about you, Ian?
Is that even a question? Yeah, summer, absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. Good, me too. Next one, books or movies? Ian, why don't you go first? Books or movies?
Movies.
And Vadim?
Audiobooks.
Audiobooks, good choice. Good choice. Yes, I'm a big fan of audio as well. It's good. I'm currently listening to Sherlock Holmes at the moment, which is very, very entertaining. And next one, morning person or night owl? Ian, where do you go?
I'm a morning person.
Morning? And what about you, Vadim?
I mean, if 5 a.m. is morning, then yes, morning.
Definitely is morning, sir. Yes. The last and probably the most important question, the quick fire questions, is Superman or Batman? Vadim, where do you go?
Superman.
Superman. I looked at you. I think I can see a bit of that coming through with the t-shirt there, mate. On there.
There you go.
Ian, how about yourself? Superman or Batman?
I'm not that big into DC, but let's say Batman. Yeah.
Good man. Okay, a bit of fun to get us started there, right? And I'm going to pass over to you in a second, Ian, to talk about things. But I did first of all want to just introduce cubesys and why we're hosting this session. So cubesys, we've been a Microsoft partner now for over 8 years. Myself and Sylvan founded the company, and we've been heavily involved in modern management, Windows 10 and the Azure platform. So if you think everything M365, and when it comes to Azure, we've helped our clients adopt Azure through the cloud adoption framework and to modernize applications through our DevOps practice. So about a year ago, when over that now, when Windows Virtual Desktop came to the market, it was very natural for us to be involved in that, and we were one of the early partners to start delivering that to the clients. And then the global pandemic hit, and remote work became very important to us all. And AVD now was very, very much centered to that, and helped a lot of our clients be able to send their staff home and work very quickly. Since then, we have done, I think, over 40 projects helping organizations from the very large enterprises and government departments down to small not-for-profit clients adopt that technology to solve their problems with remote work and publishing applications, securing their workplace and stuff. So it'll be really interesting at the end of this session, I think, to have some discussions about how cloud has changed virtual desktop infrastructure and where the future is going, right? But we'll get into that at the end and have some good chats. And please, again, please do ask those questions so that we can address them for you between the panel and myself. With that, though, I think I'll hand over to Ian, so that Ian, you can give us the first kickoff with hybrid Windows, right, for a hybrid world.
Absolutely, absolutely. You can see my screen okay there?
Yep, I can see that.
And, so I wasn't showing off my Windows 11 bottom toolbar there, taskbar there, but that's something that's very exciting as well. So look, Paul, Vadim, thanks so much for having me today. It's fantastic to be working alongside such trusted partners, and thanks so much for inviting me along today to introduce where we're up to with Windows 365. Windows 365, it was quite interesting actually. I was reflecting with a customer a couple of days ago on when the first time I'd heard about this concept of cloud PC. And it was actually, I was over in Redmond it would have been about 20 months ago now, last time I was over in Redmond, which it seems insane that it was that long ago. And we were hearing at the time and seeing at the time, obviously, this big trend around a hybrid workplace, and I don't know that Microsoft, we've been talking about this for quite some time now, and certainly everything that we've been pivoting our entire desktop and modern work story around has been this whole concept of modern work. And over the past few years, you've seen us introduce areas like modern management, where everything from out-of-the-box experience with autopilot, the overall management of the platform with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and also Intune, even our security stack can all be delivered 100% from the cloud with native controls. And it really enables the entire re-architecting of organizations and how they operationally look at their desktop environment. And we took that on, obviously, a step further, especially here in the Australia and New Zealand market, where we've had incredible traction and incredible market momentum with Microsoft Managed Desktop, where we take that modern management foundations and fundamentals and take that on to the next stage, which is actually to do things like patch management, update management, security monitoring, etc., on behalf of our customers. And we wind forward now 20 months, and obviously the world's a very different place, and the circumstances that we're all in are very different, and certainly it's very much more relevant now than ever before. And it's really starting, hybrid work is really starting now. What we're seeing in our customers is really starting to influence both the expectations of people, the places in which they work, and the processes in which they can work within. We're seeing just fundamental change in the way that organizations operate, how they motivate staff, what staff expect of their employer, and certainly everything has changed in the past probably 18 months or so since COVID's come around. I think for most organizations are really wrestling now with what is the right strategy for us going forward with hybrid work. And look, the reality, I think, for most organizations they've settled on is they need to lean in and trust their staff to work anywhere and just do their job. And that is leading to a number of very different organizational shifts. I've mentioned remote and hybrid work. And obviously remote and hybrid work, I wind back 18 months ago, or back in late February, early March, I guess it was, when COVID hit our shores in a big way, in a meaningful way. And I remember those days where we were sat on literally daily calls with some of our largest customers who were really struggling to cope with sending all of their workforce home. Their VPN access was stretched to the nth degree. Their corporate network resources were being slammed. Their VDI resources were struggling to scale, and really this need of an elastic and dynamic workforce is changing. And I would say since then, gone even further. People, I'm sure we've all got colleagues who've moved from downtown or central business districts across the country, and now moving out to the countryside and just expect to be able to work elsewhere. The other piece there is obviously with that elasticity of workforce. We look at areas like retail, for instance. What about the workforce that is at home versus in the office? But also there's a need to really scale up and scale down your workforce in line with the constant changes we're having in our working environments right now. And we're also seeing almost a perfect storm where organizations at the same time are leveraging this opportunity to digitally transform. So, whilst people are at home, or maybe whilst they aren't so busy, this is a great opportunity to transform, to lean in, to move quicker, so that when we exit these unique times, or at least move to a COVID normal state, that they're in a position to capitalize on the market ahead of them. But at the same time, obviously, they need to do that whilst retaining security and compliance. And so we looked at this and we realized that the traditional paradigm around virtual desktop, it still rings true. It's still a market. VDI is still very much a very prominent market. But there's a much larger requirement actually from our customers. No longer a VDI's just the use case, say, of business continuity planning and disaster recovery, etc., or the need for people to look after data sovereignty, or high sensitivity workloads. But actually, we recognize that Windows 365 and our positioning around this now being a whole new category around cloud PC actually opens up a whole different market opportunity for our customers and for our partners. Because what we're doing with cloud PC is really taking the VDI world from this, a heavily customized and heavily architected state, and really now been able to bring all of those insights that we've seen with Azure Virtual Desktop over the last few years, and obviously our 20 years or so of experience in viewing the virtual desktop environment, and actually boiling all of that down now into a heavily curated environment inside of Microsoft 365, and been able to provide the virtual desktop back to our customers as almost a software as a service turnkey application that they can turn on quickly, they can migrate to very quickly, literally less than an hour for even very complex enterprises, and they can just spin up and go. Also, the other side here is that with the cloud PC, it is a PC. It's not space on a server. So all of the benefits that you reside on your physical desktop today, we just take that physical desktop experience and present it through to you as software as a service through the cloud PC, through a cloud PC window. And it also enables organizations to take advantage of everything they're invested in today. And certainly Australia and New Zealand is one of our most mature markets globally for things like Azure Active Directory for your identity, Microsoft 365 Apps Defender, and also Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So it really enables you to leverage your existing investments in your tenant today, and basically inject those into our environment to provide back to you a beautiful cloud PC experience. One of the other big areas there is because of Windows 365 adjacency to everything else inside of Microsoft 365, we're starting to really unpack some of the traditional challenges with virtual desktop. Think about real-time communications experience with Microsoft Teams. Because of the direct adjacency of Windows 365 to Teams, firstly, the latency is next to zero, so that you really receive a beautiful Teams experience. But also think about the connections that we have in our fabric between the physical and virtual device. And now we can do some really cool things with Microsoft Teams, such as if we're in maybe Paul, you and I are in a chat together, and we want to escalate that to voice and video. then teams can dynamically identify what is the best resource to use for that call. So no longer are VDI users second-class citizen. They're receiving a beautiful native experience in the same way as they would expect in their physical device. And the other side also with Windows 365 is we want the model to be predictable. So we're really building Windows 365 for simplicity, and we'll talk about how it fits with Azure Virtual Desktop, which is very much built for flexibility for our customers. But what we're doing here is enabling organizations to really have a very predictable per user per month cost base for their cloud PC environment. It's scalable, it's resilient, and it's really simple to consume. So for example, the enterprise will be part of your enterprise agreement that you already have today for Microsoft 365. And you just say, okay, these are the virtual or the cloud PCs that I want attached to specific identities in my organization. And then away you go. It just becomes part of your enterprise agreement, and we run forward with that per user per month pricing. The beauty also from a user perspective is I mentioned how it's a PC, not a space on a server. So what the Windows 365 Cloud PC enables you to do is if you're working away, say you're working today on your Windows desktop and you've got applications open, you've got some tooling open, and you shut down your device. Well, it's your personalized Cloud PC space. And what that means is when you close the Cloud PC session on say your Windows device and you open it up, say on your iPad, then that session is transferred seamlessly over to the iPad. And when I say seamlessly, the layouts are the same, the views are the same, even copy and paste is transferred over. So providing that personal, familiar experience, regardless of device type, is absolutely essential. And then the other side there is where we're also making sure that with our access to our gallery images and shortly support for Microsoft Managed Desktop, is we make sure that those environments are kept up to date, kept ready, so customers don't need to worry about big Windows 10 SOE updates again. They just make sure that you're always on the latest version, latest feature updates for Windows, whether that's Windows 10 or in the future, Windows 11. And what we've seen with our customers is really started to open, and I'll just close off with what we're seeing in the Australia and New Zealand market. We're really starting to see some very interesting use cases coming through the market. Organizations, I mentioned, the more traditional virtual desktop use cases, things like data security. We're seeing a big interest group right now where we can leverage the customer's tenancy here in Australia and New Zealand, but maybe they have developers, say in India. Let me pick on India, which is obviously a common place for developers. You can stand up, but because Windows 365 leverages our backbone, you can stand up that cloud PC in India close to the developer, but retain data sovereignty in Australia and New Zealand. So there's some great use cases there for things like contact centers, developers, etc. We're seeing big interest from financial services about, okay, well, could this be useful for things like high frequency trading or developers when we look at high capacity computing? And especially as shortly we'll be releasing not just CPU but GPU support for Windows 365. And one of the things that's really interested me, the rest of the use cases are pretty straightforward, I think. What's really interesting now is customers are starting to say, well, actually, if I look at my long-range roadmap, does the cloud PC approach with Windows 365 enable me to move to much more of a BYOD model in the future, where basically my desktop that we provide to our end users basically just becomes another application in a MAM type model. So it's really changing the paradigm now on device and desktop ownership going forward. So super excited to understand more and talk more to our customers in the many markets that we're seeing traction at the moment and others, because we really do see that Windows 365 and the cloud PC approach is going to really change the paradigm for virtual desktop. But with that, Paul, I'll maybe hand back to yourself. I don't know if there's any questions at this time or if we want to leave it to Q&A.
Thanks, Ian. I think we'll leave the questions to you, but there's a good couple of discussion points I'd love to get into when we get to that part of the presentation, particularly around use cases and personas and where the data sits. Right, I think the new world of cloud virtual desktop is very exciting in that space. But let's get on across to Vadim now and ask Vadim to do his demonstration of Nerdio and the capabilities there. Just a couple of words about Nerdio from a cubesys perspective. As I mentioned earlier, we've now delivered well over 40 projects in AVD, and we're excited to see what was coming with Windows 365. But I don't think we could have delivered all that value and all that capability to our clients so effectively and precisely as if we didn't have Nerdio in the background. It really is a great product. I love the way that the architecture works. So congratulations to Vadim and his team from a technical perspective, but I also love their business model. It's very much about driving value for the clients, right? So I think if you're new to Nerdio and this is the first time you've seen it, you're going to be pleasantly surprised and more than happy to talk to you about what value that brings to the clients that we've worked with in the future. So without any further ado, I'll pass over to Vadim. How you going, mate?
Great. Thank you, Paul, and thanks for having me on this webinar. And what I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes to give a background on Nerdio, the organization, talk a bit about some of our products. Then I want to do a kind of a deep dive on Windows 365 architecture, and then, as you mentioned, do a demo of Windows 365 functionality inside of the Nerdio Manager for Enterprise product. So with that, quick background on Nerdio, the organization. We actually started the company about 5 years ago after been in the hosted virtual desktop space for a little bit over 10 years as a service provider. We hosted virtual desktops for small and mid-sized businesses in the US and started working with the Microsoft engineering team, working at that time on the RDMI, the Remote Desktop Modern Infrastructure project. Back in 2018, we launched our first Nerdio product called Nerdio for Azure. And 2018 also was when the WVD private preview started that Nerdio was a part of. In 2019, WVD, which is obviously now AVD, went into general availability towards the end of the year. And within our product, Nerdio for Azure, we had day one support, having worked side by side with Microsoft engineering on building out that product. In 2020, we launched Nerdio Manager for WVD, which was our enterprise product, and it actually launched on March 9th or 10th, which is when the demand for remote computing and virtual desktops really skyrocketed. So we spent the last year and a half helping organizations all around the world really adopt WVD, build it up, scale it out, and have built a lot of those learnings into our Nerdio Manager for WVD product. In 2021, we launched a new product called Nerdio Manager for Enterprise that took all of the learnings we had from WVD in the enterprise space, and Nerdio Manager for MSP. We launched that product early this year to help our MSP partners that are mostly working with small and mid-sized businesses all around the world, help them manage Azure virtual desktop environments. And at the same time, we renamed our Nerdio Manager for WVD product to Nerdio Manager for Enterprise. So today we have two products, Nerdio Manager for MSP, Nerdio Manager for Enterprise. I will spend our time today on the demo specifically focusing on the Enterprise product. And the way Windows 365 played into all of this is about a year, maybe 14 months ago. Microsoft engineering started working alongside with us in helping build Windows 365 into our products and helping sort of shape the solution as it was being architected and built. A couple of words on some of the experience that we've had with Azure Virtual Desktops. As I mentioned, we've been working with Microsoft engineering for several years now. We have over 1 million users in our AVD products under management. We've seen over 3,000 customer deployments since WVD went GA in October of 2019. And we're seeing roughly about 200 new deployments of AVD per month. And now add to that all of the Windows 365 deployments that are coming online as well, which is really the focus of today's discussion. So if we look at where the Nerdio Manager suite of products fits into the Microsoft ecosystem and what value it delivers. So as Ian mentioned, we have the Microsoft Azure Virtual Desktop, which is a flexible Azure-based VDI platform, and it's really optimized for flexibility, and it's really meant to accommodate every type of virtual desktop use case. And then now we have Windows 365, which is the easier to deploy and manage and fixed price Microsoft 365-based VDI platform. What Nerdio Manager does is it overlays both of those products and provides a unified management, deployment, and auto-scaling interface that really makes either use case, either type of virtual desktop, whether it's a cloud PC in Windows 365, or it's a pooled or personal desktop in Azure Virtual Desktop, easy to manage from the same UI using the same concepts and same investments, as we will see in just a few minutes. And the type of value that Nerdio Manager adds on top of Microsoft services sort of falls into these three categories. The first one is all about optimization and reducing costs. That applies primarily to the Azure Virtual Desktop side of things because Windows 365 is a fixed price offer. But the second and third really apply to both products. The automation in order to increase reliability, so everything from image management, integration with third-party products like ServiceNow, the ability to get visibility into user performance and utilization of the environment are really some of the key features of Nerdio Manager. And then finally, the simplification of management, of unifying all the Azure technologies and all the Microsoft 365 technologies that touch the virtual desktop world are all unified into the Nerdio Manager suite of products so they can be managed in a very familiar, consistent way, regardless of whether a user has an AVD desktop, a cloud PC, or maybe even both in many deployments. So with that, I will switch over to talking about Nerdio Manager for Enterprise, specifically in the context of Windows 365. So let's spend a few minutes talking about Windows 365 architecture. So first thing to realize is that there are two editions of the product. There is something called Windows 365 Business and Windows 365 Enterprise. Our demo today and our discussion will focus primarily on the Enterprise product. But there are some significant differences between the two, and it's worthwhile spending a couple of minutes on those differences. And I think that will help illustrate the different use cases where the business and the enterprise products really come in. So business cloud PCs or Microsoft Windows 365 Business is really meant for smaller organizations. There's actually a limit of 300 licenses or 300 cloud PC instances per Azure AD tenant. So it's really meant for smaller organizations, whereas there is no limit with enterprise. And it's designed to be super simple without any technical prerequisites whatsoever. The way it works is you purchase a business cloud PC license. That license is assigned to a user through the Microsoft 365 admin portal, and that is it. There is no other prerequisite. There is no networking that needs to be configured. There is no Active Directory that needs to be connected to. That VM gets provisioned within a few minutes of license being assigned to the user, and that VM becomes joined to the Azure Active Directory. There's no AD involvement here at all. And these cloud PCs reside entirely within Microsoft-controlled Azure subscription, which means the cost of compute, storage, and networking is incurred by Microsoft and charged to the customer as a fixed monthly Microsoft 365 SKU. By contrast, enterprise cloud PCs are quite a bit more flexible, but that also means there are some prerequisites that are needed in order to configure them. So enterprise cloud PCs use a technology that is really recently released in Azure, and I think Windows 365 is really the first service that's using this technology, called VNet injection. And the concept behind VNet injection is that the VM itself, so the compute and storage, the VM and the operating system disk, runs within subscription A, which is controlled by Microsoft, as you can see, here on the right-hand side. But the network card that virtual machine is connected to gets injected into a virtual network within a customer-controlled subscription in a VNet that can be configured from a routing perspective, from an IP address perspective, a load balance perspective. So everything that you can do in Azure when it comes to networking can be configured on this virtual network. So these enterprise cloud PCs are effectively plugged into the customer's network. And as a result of that, customer has control over the egress traffic, but also bears the responsibility for the cost of that bandwidth. As opposed to compute and storage, the VMs and the disks are part of the license that is sold through Microsoft 365. In addition to the VNet injection, enterprise cloud PCs also have a different way of connecting to the directory. So as we mentioned, with business cloud PCs, there is native Azure AD join that's happening. With enterprise cloud PCs, Active Directory is still involved. So there is an Active Directory connection that must be accessible from this virtual network. And this Active Directory must be synchronized to the Azure AD instance, the Azure AD tenant, and hybrid AD join must be enabled on that network or on that tenant. So when these machines join the Active Directory, they get automatically synced over to Azure AD, and in Azure AD, they're hybrid AD joined. So those are some of the architectural changes, and as we get into the demo, again, we'll be focusing on the enterprise, and we'll see where this network and Active Directory comes into play. The last thing I wanted to mention about the architecture is the IT admin experience from a management perspective. So with enterprise cloud PCs, there's two places that IT administrators need to configure the environment. Number one, through the Azure portal, they must configure the virtual network, right, which is a prerequisite for enterprise Windows 365. And then all the VM management or the cloud PC management is done through MEM, through Microsoft Endpoint Manager, through Microsoft Intune, through that interface that manages these machines as if they were just another Windows device in the customer estate of other Windows devices. Apologies for the phone ringing in the background. Hopefully it's not too distracting. All right, so from an end user perspective, though, the connectivity is identical between the two. The user uses the same Azure Virtual Desktop constructs as far as the same client, the same authentication mechanism, which means the same multi-factor authentication can apply to that user account. So from a user perspective, there's no difference between business and enterprise, but from an admin perspective, there is quite a significant difference. So with that, let me jump into the Nerdio Manager for Enterprise product and show you how this all comes together and how you can deploy and manage cloud PCs in Nerdio Manager. So in order to, let's look at this demo environment that I set up. We have an existing AVD deployment. We have a workspace. Within this workspace, we have a host pool. This happens to be a personal host pool with just one single assigned user. If we click on that host pool, we will see there is a session host VM. So for those of you familiar with Azure Virtual Desktop, these are gonna appear as very familiar concepts. At the same time, we also have a desktop image that was used to create that host pool and is used to manage the host pool. We also have scripted actions There are various scripts that help us install software, apply optimizations. So again, all the familiar Windows Azure Virtual Desktop concepts. So for somebody with an existing Azure Virtual Desktop deployment, if they want to enable Windows 365 and start managing and deploying those cloud PCs, what they need to do is go under the settings page, go to Azure Environment, and they will see Windows 365 Enterprise. And as you can see, the current status is disabled. So we will click on disabled, and this will tell us what's going to happen next. First of all, we have a couple of prerequisites in order to enable this functionality. Number one, we need an Intune license that must be present in the Azure AD tenant. That's what makes MEM, Microsoft Endpoint Manager, available within the tenant, and that's a requirement. And then, as we mentioned on our slide, we need to have Azure AD Hybrid Join enabled for any machines that join the Active Directory that we have already specified. And then it just tells us what type of permissions the Nerdio Manager application will be given once we enable this functionality. Once we click OK, this is going to enable Windows 365 Enterprise. At the same time, we will see a new menu item that is going to show up here called Windows 365. And what's going to happen in the background is, because we have an existing Azure environment with Azure Virtual Desktop, we already have certain networks that are defined. We already have certain Active Directory profiles that have been defined in order to use the Azure Virtual Desktop resources. So with that information already being in place, Nerdio Manager will automatically set up all the needed constructs for deployment of cloud PCs. And let's look at those. So the first thing that we need in order to start deploying cloud PCs is what's called an on-premises network connection. An on-premises network connection combines a Azure VNet, which you can see listed right here. We have two of them. One is in the East US 2, and the other one I think is in the South Central US. So it combines a network with an Active Directory profile. So if you'll recall, in our diagram, we had the VNet injection happening into this network, and then when the VMs are going to join the domain, they need AD credentials to do that. So as you can see, we already have two networks that have been created because the system is automatically aware of the Active Directory configuration, the VNet, and a name has been given to it based on the region where these networks exist. Now, one great thing about Windows 365 is there is something called a Watchdog Service, which automatically checks and monitors the health status of a network. So if you click on this health status, which is currently in past status, it will tell you all of the various things that were tested. So for example, it checks that it's in a supported region, that there is sufficient number of IP addresses, there aren't policy restrictions preventing new devices from being created, DNS can resolve Active Directory, all the types of things that normally would have to be done manually is validated by this new Windows 365 Watchdog Service. And if any of these fail in the future, the status will be changed automatically so administrator can be alerted that something is going on the network. For example, if the Active Directory password expired, so if the domain joiner account password expires, the network status will go into a failed state because it will no longer be able to join new VMs when they are provisioned, those cloud PCs. So that is component number one. We have a network connection that's created based on the VNet that's already in the environment. The second thing is called a provisioning policy. A provisioning policy is what combines a cloud PC image. So for example, here we have the various versions of Windows 10. It combines an existing network connection, which we looked at on the previous screen, and it targets it to a certain Azure AD group. So for example, let's say I have a group called Windows 365 East US users. So let's go ahead and create a new provisioning policy. I'm going to call it Win365 East US 2 policy, okay? And I'm going to select the latest version of Windows 10. I will select the East US 2 Cloud PCs network, and I will target it to this security group, which was enumerated from my Azure AD tenant. Once I click OK, we have a new policy that's going to be created right there. And now we are ready to start provisioning Cloud PCs. Now, what does it take for a Cloud PC to be provisioned? The only thing we need is to assign a user a license and add the user to this group that we just targeted with this policy. So I'm going to open up my Windows 365 Admin Center. I'm going to pick my Chad CEO user. I will go to Manage Groups. I'm going to say Add Group Assignment. I'll search for my Windows 365 East US 2 users and add that user to the group. We can see it's right there. I will then go to Licenses and Apps, and I'm going to assign my one remaining Windows 365 Enterprise 4 vCPU, 16 gig of RAM, 128 gigabyte of storage license, and click Save. And that is really all that's necessary. So just to summarize the steps that we went through, the system automatically created our network connection, leveraging the VNet and the domain credentials that were already part of our AVD environment. We created a provisioning policy that targeted an image and a network connection to a security group. And then we added the user to that security group and assigned the user a license. So what we will expect to see now is if we go to our Cloud PCs page and we give this a few minutes, we will notice that a new Cloud PC will appear on this page. It's going to be assigned to that Chad CEO user that we've added to the provisioning group, and it will be in the status of provisioning. And in probably 30 minutes to maybe an hour or so, that PC will become available. And as soon as the user goes to windows365.microsoft.com, that machine can be used and the user can log in. Now, while we're waiting for this to appear on the screen, let's do a couple of advanced things or a couple of optimizations. For example, let's say in this particular provisioning policy or in this particular security group, I want to make sure that all my users are getting local admin rights on their machine. Now, why do I want that? Perhaps I want them to be able to manage their own PCs, apply their own updates, install their own software. So the way that's accomplished is just by going to User Settings. We can add a new policy. Let's say New User Settings Policy. And we will enable local admin rights. And we will select which group we want to target for this particular policy. And it's going to be the same Windows 365 East US 2 users. And we'll click OK. What this will do is any new desktops or any existing desktops for users who are part of this group will automatically be given local admin rights at that machine. So it's really as easy as that. You set up the policy and you set up what group to target. Now let's imagine that I wanted to install some software on these Cloud PCs. I can leverage my existing scripted actions that I may be using as part of my AVD deployment. So let's go into Windows Scripts. Let's find my Install Zoom Client scripted action. I'm going to click on it. I have now an option to enable the scripted action for Cloud PC. So I will go ahead and turn it on. I can, customize some of these settings, but I'm going to leave that alone. And I'm going to select the group that I want to assign it to. So let's go ahead and assign it to East US 2 users and click OK. And what this will do is it will assign the script to those users, and those users will have my Zoom client installed automatically. Now, I may want to install my Microsoft Edge optimizations, for instance. I can do the same thing. Let's do that here. And let's also maybe install Teams or let's do install VS Code on those machines. So let's do that here. Okay, and you know what? I just realized I forgot one other prerequisite for this cloud PC to be provisioned, and that is, in addition to the Windows 365 Enterprise license, we need a license that contains Intune. Because if we don't have Intune, then this user cannot be managed from Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So what I forgot to do is assign this Microsoft 365 Business Premium, which includes Intune. So I'm going to do that right now. Click Save, and I now have several scripts that are going to be assigned to cloud PCs. And as soon as those PCs come online, those scripts will run and the software will get installed. I have user settings defined that are going to make users local administrators, and we can check to see if that PC is being provisioned, and lo and behold, we have a new PC that's being provisioned. You can see what network it's on, you can see which provisioning policy it's using, we can see who the user is, it's my chat CEO user, and the license that I assigned. So literally as easy as that, the network connection was set up for us. We added the provisioning policy, we added the user to the group, assigned the right licenses, and our PC is now coming online within the next few minutes. One last thing that I wanted to show you in this demo is how to leverage your existing investment into desktop images. So for those of you who are using Nerdio Manager to manage Azure Virtual Desktop, you will be familiar with the desktop images section, and in here you can go and click on set as image, and you'll see a new checkbox that says enable for cloud PC. If I go ahead and enable that and click run now, Nerdio will make this existing image, which you have already customized with all the software and updates and other customizations, will be available when working with provisioning policies. So if we go to an existing provisioning policy and look at our PC, cloud PC images, once that image gets processed, it will be available in the list. So Nerdio Manager lets you easily enable Windows 365, provision new cloud PCs based on out-of-the-box gallery images from Microsoft, but also leverage your existing investments into desktop images, into scripted actions, and other components of your AVD environment. And you can see that everything is managed from a unified interface. And in reality, a user can really have a cloud PC alongside their Azure Virtual Desktop capabilities. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Paul, and we'll take some questions.
Thank you very much, Vadim. As always, fantastic demo. And look, one of the things, I don't know if everybody's been across Nerdio before, or if it's a new introduction to some of you, but having worked with the Nerdio team for over a year, I think we always see a tremendous amount of value from the Nerdio platform. It really does make our lives easier as IT admins in the back end, and allows the users to get a better experience. And one of the things that my team always passes on to me to feedback to Nerdio is the wonderful way that they engage when listen to our clients and our problems, and then lo and behold, it turns up in a product as solved within one or two releases. So awesome work from the guys at Nerdio. Really do listen. So if you have got a problem or a question, please do ask them or ask us, and we'll pass it on. On that vein, obviously, you can see that Vadim has been working very closely with Microsoft for over a year now with W365, and he's probably one of the world's leading experts, without any joke on this matter. So if you've got some questions, please do fire away in Q&A. But I did promise that we would have some discussions, and probably one of the most poignant ones and maybe confusing ones for our audience might be around Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365, and when do we use which one, and what's the use cases and things. So I thought I might kick that off with that question. I'm going to ask that to both our panelists today. I'll start with Ian, and then maybe get more technical background from Vadim. So Ian, how do you see AVD and Windows 365 working alongside each other? Do they compete? Why have we got two products in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, super relevant question, and one that we're discussing through with a lot of customers. Look, the reality is both, as I'm sure many people are picking up, the The use case for Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop is similar, but certainly not the same. We're expecting to see customers with different persona types that map against both Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop. So in Windows 365, think about those users that you want to be able to provide that personalized desktop experience to. So, user experience is really important. They need an always-on desktop or close to an always-on desktop, yeah. And you just want them to have the, that personalized experience. Think of Azure Virtual Desktop as really built for great deals of flexibility. So think of those typical what would be a great example. So say in maybe healthcare or something where a doctor or nurse may only need access to their desktop for 10% of the working day, yeah, or 15% of the working day. So you can run those high concurrency rates. And then you can just, or maybe you just want to virtualize your app estate. You don't want to be working full time in a virtual desktop environment. Again, Azure Virtual Desktop, great use case there. And the reason being, obviously, is that although what we've done with Windows 365, we've been able to take the insights out of Azure Virtual Desktop over the past few years and what we've seen in the industry for the past 20 odd years since, and Vadim tell me how old this market is. I'm guessing it's about 25 years old. We've been able to look at concurrency rates, and that's enabled us basically to hedge, whereas you're having to figure out the pricing model of your concurrency or your Azure consumption in the Azure Virtual Desktop world. You haven't to figure that out for your company. We're able to take, in effect, that hedge across Windows 365 and price accordingly across all of our customer base globally. Yeah. So what we've been able to do is provide a really competitive price point for Windows 365 based on, and which has been able to bring in additional use cases. Things like developers, things like I mentioned their contact center operators. Those people that are on that kind of 1 to 1.5 concurrency kind of rate. But then it gets beyond that, into high concurrency rates and low concurrency rates, and that's where Azure Virtual Desktop comes in really smartly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've got some additional insights based on what you're seeing in customers too.
No, that's definitely sort of in the direction that we are seeing and talking to customers. I actually have a slide. Let's see if I can share. So the way we think and talk about Azure Virtual Desktop versus Windows 365, as you mentioned, Ian, is very much use case focused, right? So you may and will have lots of customers that are using both, and that's our vision for our management interface, is really to allow you to move users flexibly from one to the other and manage both in the same place. So it's definitely use case based, not even not organization based, but more a use case based approach. We try to come up with some very specific scenarios where one is a clear better choice than the other. So this is by no means an exhaustive decision flow, but I think it helps people kind of think through the possibilities. So I'll just quickly go through this and give you my perspective. So, we talked about business and enterprise version of Windows 365. So certainly, if it's a small deployment, if all you're looking to do is put up a small number of desktops, whether you're a small organization or a small group of users within a larger organization, there's no beating Windows 365 Business. It's perfect. It doesn't have any complexity. It doesn't need any prerequisite. It's super easy. It's just like buying an Office 365 license and assigning it to a user. So I think that's a no-brainer. In many organizations that don't currently leverage desktop virtualization, so they don't use Azure Virtual Desktop, they don't use Citrix, they don't use VMware, but are using Microsoft Endpoint Manager to administer physical devices, I think using Win365 is also no-brainer. There is no additional skilling, additional tooling that needs to be introduced. It's sort of a very natural fit. And I think a huge segment of the Windows market, right? I mean, hundreds of millions of devices out there fall into this category. I think desktop virtualization is sort of a small set of that market today. So I think Windows 365 makes a lot of sense there. The third scenario is if you have these users that need personalized desktop, like you mentioned, Ian, you may have designers or architects or developers that need a local machine that they can manage themselves with local admin rights, and they're using it kind of all the time. It's not something you can scale and shut down on them outside of certain hours. In that case, again, Windows 365 is a clear choice because it's number one, more cost effective, it's easier to deploy, and it gives the user all the control that they need. On the other side of the equation, there are certain cases when Azure Virtual Desktop is a clear choice as well. For example, if all you need to deliver is a published application rather than a full desktop experience, well, Azure Virtual Desktop is the only technology that can deliver that. Windows 365 doesn't have that mode of just app publishing. So that's an easy one as well. If your usage, as you mentioned, Ian, if people are using it with low concurrency, or maybe even the quantity of users is changing drastically throughout the month, then using Azure Virtual Desktop is going to be more cost effective because your costs are based on the Azure infrastructure consumed rather than the number of licenses purchased per month. So I think in that case, it's going to be more cost effective to put up a certain amount of infrastructure one day, grow it the next day, shrink it again the day after. It's just going to provide more flexibility, which is what AVD is all about, that flexibility. And then finally, if cost is primary consideration and complexity can be tolerated, and there is a lot of opportunity for pooling users together onto multi-session VMs, AVD is the way to go. It can really provide some significant savings on a per user basis if those users can be combined together onto a small number of VMs rather than giving each and every user a dedicated machine. So, that's sort of my perspective on when to use which. Obviously, there's lots of other cases, but I think this is, helpful directionally, I hope.
Yeah, I think that's a great slide, Vadim, and of course that's on your website, and we'll get you some artifacts out, everybody, after this session. So we'll make sure we'll follow up with that type of collateral. And it's a good segue into sort of some of the questions that are coming in, and the next topic of discussion, I think, in that personas and use cases have always been super important when it comes to VDI. I've been working with VDI technologies for 15, 20 years, and it's always been really important to get the right solution to our end users, and picking between those two is now important. But let's talk about the apps and some of those sort of use cases. So at cubesys here, we've seen people taking VDI to a next level now. It's in cloud, right? So we've got making use of the GPU capabilities at the back for engineering applications and call centers with mass users, and so lots and lots of data scientists, developers having, particularly overseas developers needing a secure desktop to be able to develop applications. So lots and lots of use cases on different personas using them. But applications, how do we support our applications? I mean, traditionally VDI was always like, well, that's different. You have to go and install it on a physical PC if you want to, make sure that it's supported and that. Where are we with that? And maybe that's a question for Ian. And I know there's some great news around Azure for Windows 365. So Ian, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think the biggest benefits that both Azure Virtual Desktop and the Windows 365 Cloud PC brings is, to your point, Paul, it's not a different environment anymore, right? Your physical desktop and your virtual desktop is now just your desktop, yeah? So if your physical desktop supports SCCM co-managed and you publish your apps via SCCM, et cetera, basically what we're doing is taking your desktop environment in your tenant and injecting that into Windows 365. So all of your policies, everything you've got today, just put it into Windows 365 and you will support your SOE, in the most extreme case. Now, obviously, we'd much prefer you're in a modern managed environment, and we have gallery images that we put through Windows 365 that you can align your Intune policies towards, and you can certainly move to a much more modern managed environment. But we recognize that's a journey for customers, and absolutely you can leverage your Windows 10 environment today. And by the end of this year, we're targeting that Microsoft managed desktop can be one of those images. So Microsoft managed environment, where we take a much bigger position around helping you keep your apps up to date and keep your obviously keeping you on the latest feature and releases of Windows 10 and in the future Windows 11. To your point about Azure, yeah, absolutely. You know, we want our customers to be able to modernize, you know, and we want you to be on the journey to gaining the benefits that modern management gains. So with Desktop Azure, absolutely, we've got our experts in Fast Track who'll work alongside you to help provide guidance, to provide insight, to provide advice on how to modernize your applications.
Perfect, great, and that's great news that Azure is there to help us tackle those applications and those vendors that need to help come along on the journey, which is fantastic. That sort of takes me to maybe in the next discussion point, and one a comment I think I picked up during your presentation, Ian, and something that I remember from 2 or 3 years ago, maybe being at the partner conference, and I was listening to Satya do the keynote, and he made a comment that has stuck with me ever since. He said that data has gravity. And what he means by that is when we put our data into the cloud, right, then we end up building solutions and delivering end user computer stuff to them, right? And what I think Windows 365 does, and along with AVD, is now put those two things closer together. And that's always been an aim for virtual desktop infrastructure. We want to put the users end user experience right next to the data and the applications that they consume, right? So that will go a next step. With Windows 365, and I think I heard Scott Manchester talking about some exciting developments coming with regards to how we might work with even things like Office 365. And if we think about how we do that today, once we provision a PC, a physical PC, we have to hydrate that PC, and that means that we have to sync our OneDrive data and our Outlook data and our OneNote and all those things, right, to make it usable. But if we're using Windows 365 in the cloud, that hydration is instant. Is always there, and we've got this wonderful backplane and fantastic bandwidth and data available in the back. So all those things will be a next level experience for our users. Maybe I'll just I know you had that conversation with Scott Manchester the other day, Vadim. So you got anything to add to that, and maybe give us a bit of insight of what you can see or what you hope is coming for Windows 365 and what the roadmap is for us?
I mean, certainly that the data gravity you mentioned is, having all of the technologies within the Microsoft Cloud really adjacent to each other just opens the world to all sorts of possibilities. As you mentioned with Office and hydrating Outlook data, we always had to worry about things like cached mode and retaining duplicates of your email in this OST file that eats up a ton of disk space, right? So, I'm getting really nitty gritty here, but it's a big pain point for people, whether it's an ADD or if it's on premises and, on expensive systems. With Windows 365 being very close to, on the network level, to the Microsoft 365 and Office infrastructure, there may be a time when cached mode is no longer needed because the performance is good enough without having to cache and duplicate that data. So I think just the adjacency of all of these components together opens the world to many other possibilities in cloud PC that will make it just much better than a physical desktop can even be.
Yeah, and I would layer on that, you're absolutely right, Vadim, and Paul, certainly your intro there. We've got to help our customers spend also at the operational level, spend way less time doing things that aren't core to their business. Yeah. It's that whole paradigm. To me, it's like the traditional desktop perfect storm, right? You haven't got enough time to modernize the applications that make your world different because you've got to test all those apps on the latest SOE for Windows 10, right? It's like a perpetual cycle of kind of dysfunction when you look at it from a 30,000 foot view. So we've got to help our customers empower their IT teams to focus on areas that are different, make their organizations different. Every organization needs to keep replenishing, modernizing, and differentiating through their data estate. And we want them to be able to focus on that. The second part is we need to remove the amount of barriers that as possible between the end user experience and the cloud itself, the end user in the cloud. Yeah. So everything we're doing around modern management with Windows 365 now means that people can just natively access the cloud securely and receive that beautiful user experience, uninhibited by, you know, everything else that's blocking it. Obviously, that's an extreme view, what we're all moving towards, and there are many steps on the way.
Yeah, look, I think you're dead right, Ian. And as soon as AVD comes out, and I think it's true with Windows 365 as well, I was very conscious for our clients to point out that maybe that's the best place to start testing your applications with Windows 10, right? And as we know, organizations, particularly large organizations, struggle with servicing and the volume of updates, and it is, I suppose, quite risky to put that update onto old hardware or a big fleet of physical machines. But we can get that assurance around the applications and the new version of Windows 10 and that servicing cycle in AVD first, or in Windows 365 first, and give ourselves confidence around the application layer at least, right, that we're ready to go, because it is the same operating system, right? And that's an important takeaway. Right. Look, I'm very conscious we've probably gone over a few minutes, and it's a wonderful conversation, but I thought it's probably time for us to wrap up. And I'll first of all say thank you very much for the panel. It's great conversations, and thanks for the questions coming in, everybody. If we haven't got to them now, we will endeavour to get those answered offline and follow up with you with some collateral. But I will wrap up maybe by just pointing out the cubesys has a offer around AVD and Windows 365, and what we often find with our clients is they get excited about their technology and they're keen to onboard it, but of course we've got to put a business case together. We need to understand what the costs are and what the roadmap to get is from where we are today as an organisation to that future goal. And so our offer is available to everybody that's joined the session today. We'll do that, which consists of us doing an interview with you to understand your use cases and personas, and then we build you an economic summary and a roadmap to get from where you are today, and we'll give you the high level steps in your plan, and you'll get that in a full report from me and my team. Okay, so we'll follow up with some information for all attendees with that as well. So again, thank you very much for the guys helping with the questions and answers. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for joining us today. Cheers. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye.